On August 30th, 1944, a hidden mutiny fractured the Allied High Command just short of Metz. Starved of fuel by chafed U.S. Third Army Commander General George S. Patton refused to halt his advance. Instead, his brilliant deputy, Brigadier General Hobart Gay, constructed an intricate web of administrative deception to wage an unauthorized fortress war. How did Patton's chief of staff trick the Supreme Allied Command? Could this rogue staff gamble have altered the course of World War II? The operational landscape of Western Europe during the late summer of 1944 was defined by an unprecedented strategic dilemma that exposed a fundamental ideological rift at the very apex of the Allied coalition. Following the near-total destruction of the German 7th Army within the chaotic confines of the Falaise Pocket in mid-August, the retreating Wehrmacht forces were fleeing eastward in absolute disarray, leaving the open plains of France vulnerable to rapid exploitation. Confronted with this sudden vacuum of enemy resistance, General Dwight D. Eisenhower, acting as the Supreme Allied Commander of the Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, formally instituted a highly systematic, broad-front strategy. This operational doctrine dictated that all advancing Allied army groups must move forward in a synchronized, heavily coordinated alignment along a vast geographical axis spanning from the North Sea to the Swiss border. Eisenhower's primary strategic objective was to systematically isolate and neutralize German forces entirely west of the Rhine River, systematically secure vital deep-water ports like Antwerp to anchor the theater's vulnerable supply lines, and consolidate a massive, unassailable logistical platform before risking a deep, potentially exposed penetration into the heavily fortified German homeland. This cautious, highly institutional methodology stood in absolute, irreconcilable opposition to the aggressive operational philosophy championed by the legendary commander of the U.S. Third Army, Lieutenant General George S. Patton. Patton, a relentless advocate of rapid, armored penetration, fiercely rejected the broad front approach, labeling it a timid strategy that unthinkingly squandered a historic opportunity to end the war before the onset of winter. He argued with immense fervor that a singular, intensely concentrated, and completely uninterrupted armored thrust through the historic terrain of the Lorraine region and directly into the Saar industrial basin would shatter the fragile, disorganized crust of the retreating German defenses before they could establish a cohesive line. In Patton's view, speed was the ultimate form of security, and he maintained that a relentless, unyielding pursuit would permanently deny the traumatized German command structure the critical operational pause necessary to reorganize its shattered divisions behind the formidable natural barrier of the Moselle River. This intense, escalating doctrinal dispute was rapidly pushed to a dangerous, uncontrolled breaking point by a catastrophic, systemic breakdown of the Allied logistical apparatus across the entire European continent. While theater-wide records indicated that aggregate stockpiles of petroleum, oil, and lubricants, known technically as POL, were physically increasing at the Normandy beachheads, the actual mechanical distribution of these vital commodities to the frontline units was severely crippled. The Allied armies had advanced at a velocity that far outpaced the wildest expectations of the pre-invasion planners, resulting in a distribution crisis where the physical distance between the primary supply ports in Normandy and the rapidly shifting vanguard of the combat units soon exceeded an astonishing 400 miles. Every single ton of ammunition, food, and fuel had to be hauled across hundreds of miles of devastated French infrastructure by truck, creating a logistical bottleneck that threatened to completely paralyze the entire Allied war machine at the absolute height of its operational momentum. The physical parameters of this resource crisis were starkly felt by the Third Army's armored columns, which were consuming between 350,000 and 400,000 gallons of combat-grade fuel every single day during their relentless pursuit across France. On the critical date of August 30th, 1944, the structural fragility of the theater's supply network manifested in a devastating blow to Patton's forward operational planning. The newly organized Red Ball Express, a massive prioritized military truck convoy system designed to rapidly haul supplies across fixed, one-way highway routes, was itself experiencing an internal fuel crisis, burning nearly 300,000 gallons of gasoline daily just to operate its fleet of 6,000 overworked vehicles. On that fateful day, instead of the hundreds of thousands of gallons required to sustain Patton's eastern advance, the Red Ball Express managed to deliver a meager completely inadequate 32,000 gallons of gasoline to the Third Army's forward supply depots. This instantaneous, near-total collapse of fuel deliveries brought Patton's highly successful, high-velocity armored advance to an abrupt, grinding halt just short of the Moselle River, stranding his tanks with empty fuel cells. The immediate tactical consequence of this enforced operational halt was profoundly disastrous for the Allied cause, as it directly granted the German First Army, under the energetic command of General Otto von Knobelsdorff, a completely unexpected lease on life. When Patton's tanks ran entirely out of gasoline, the German forces in the Lorraine sector were a broken, panicked rabble, incapable of mounting any coordinated defensive stand. However, the multi-day pause forced upon the Third Army provided von Knobelsdorff with the priceless, uninterrupted time necessary to systematically rally his fleeing personnel, integrate thousands of arriving reinforcements, and construct a formidable, deeply layered defensive line throughout the region. Most critically, this operational window allowed the Germans to heavily reinforce and fully ammunition the massive, ultra-modern ring of underground fortifications surrounding the strategic city of Metz. Patton was absolutely incandescent with rage, viewing this catastrophic supply restriction not as an impartial logistical reality, but as a calculated political plot in order to favor his bitter rivals. Patton's worst fears were officially confirmed when the strategic leadership made the formal, definitive decision to prioritize the northern axis of advance over his own Lorraine corridor. Eisenhower chose to allocate the overwhelming majority of the theater's scarce fuel, transport trucks, and ammunition stockpiles to Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery's 21st Army Group to support the launch of Operation Market Garden, a daring, massive airborne and armored gamble designed to outflank the West Wall defenses by seizing a series of critical bridges in the Netherlands. To ensure complete compliance with this theater-wide prioritization, the commander of the 12th Army Group, Lieutenant General Omar Bradley, was explicitly ordered to restrain Patton's aggressive nature. Bradley formally and unequivocally ordered Patton to transition the entire U.S. Third Army from an active offensive footing into a strictly static defensive posture. This controversial strategic transition was institutionalized as the October Pause, a period intended to freeze Patton's lines indefinitely. To ensure that the Third Army could not violate these written defensive mandates, Major General Wade Hyslop's highly experienced 15th Corps, which had formed the powerful southern flank of Patton's fast-moving advance, was entirely stripped away from the Third Army and reassigned to the 6th Army Group. Furthermore, the veteran 7th Armored Division, a premier mobile exploitation force, was abruptly transferred away to the 9th Army, leaving the 3rd Army with severely depleted combat resources, highly restricted operational boundaries, and a strict ammunition rationing protocol enforced by Bradley's headquarters. By systematically removing Patton's tanks and heavily restricting his artillery shells, they had successfully neutralized his ability to disrupt Eisenhower's coordinated broad front strategy. However, the severe institutional friction generated by these restrictive measures gave birth to what modern military historians define as the Metz paradox. While Patton's command group formally acknowledged Chef's written orders on paper, signed the required defensive transition receipts, and submitted compliant administrative paperwork to higher headquarters, the Third Army staff was internally operating with a completely different, highly defiant intent. They refused to allow their offensive momentum to be permanently frozen by what they considered a flawed, overly timid Supreme Command doctrine. Patton famously crystallized this philosophy of institutional insubordination by stating to his inner circle that his localized, limited attacks were designed to maintain the offensive spirit of the troops by attacking at various points whenever means permitted. To aggressively bypass Chef's defensive mandates without triggering a formal court-martial or relief of command, the brilliant Third Army staff devised a highly sophisticated tactical loophole. They utilized reconnaissance and force missions as a deliberate, calculated mechanism to initiate unauthorized major combat actions. The operational logic underpinning this bureaucratic deception was as simple as it was dangerously effective. The staff knew that if a forward battalion or regiment was ordered to perform a limited reconnaissance probe toward an enemy position and purposely got into a heavy fight, the higher command structures at the 12th Army Group in Kyiv would be administratively and morally forced to immediately release the necessary fuel, transport, and emergency ammunition to sustain and rescue those committed American troops. By deliberately orchestrating these aggressive tactical encounters, the Third Army staff could systematically transform a localized, officially sanctioned defensive probe into a major corps-level offensive fait accompli that Eisenhower could not easily cancel without causing a massive public relations disaster. This high-stakes bureaucratic shell game required a masterclass in administrative manipulation to ensure that higher headquarters remained completely oblivious to the true scale of Patton's offensive operations until it was far too late to intervene. The flawless execution of this highly unauthorized agenda required a sophisticated, ironclad administrative buffer at headquarters to shield the Third Army from Chef's direct intervention and intense oversight. This critical role was filled with absolute precision by Patton's trusted Deputy Chief of Staff, Brigadier General Hobart Gay, a former cavalry officer who had transitioned to the Quartermaster Corps in the 1930s. Gay possessed a rare, formidable combination of bold operational maneuver experience and a deep, masterly comprehension of complex military bureaucracy. A vital historical distinction must be explicitly made regarding the Third Army's internal command structure during the height of the Metz campaign from September to November 1944. Major General Hugh J. Gaffey served as the official chief of staff, handling broad theater interactions, while Gay operated with immense autonomy as the deputy chief of staff, managing the daily operations of the war room, the formulation of field directives, and the critical flow of all outgoing communications. It was only on December 3, 1944, that Gaffey relinquished his post to assume command of the battle-worn 4th Armored Division, at which exact point Gay was formally elevated to Chief of Staff. Operating from the Third Army's main, highly secured command post located in the historic city of Nancy, General Gay managed an intensely integrated, fanatically loyal staff that systematically filtered, edited, and delayed the operational situation reports known as SITREPs, sent to Bradley's 12th Army Group in Chi-F. Gay masterfully utilized a technique known as semantic shielding to obscure the true, massive scale of Third Army's offensive actions. Major heavy casualty operations, launched by Major General Walton Walker's 20 Corps against the formidable, interlocking concrete fortresses of the Metz Ring, specifically the bloody, near-disastrous frontal assaults on Fort Bryant, were intentionally framed in official outward communications as localized reconnaissance and force missions, routine patrols, or minor administrative defensive line rectifications. By intentionally delaying the transmission of detailed tactical SITREPs and heavily minimizing casualty figures in early reports, Gay ensured that by the time Chi-F realized a major, unauthorized corps-level offensive was occurring, the tactical units were already deeply committed to combat, making a forced withdrawal politically and militarily impossible. This brilliant, highly deceptive administrative filtering was vividly demonstrated during a closed-door press conference held on November 6, 1944. With a massive general offensive to encircle and capture the entire city of Metz imminent, Patton gathered his inner staff and requested that the assembled war correspondents voluntarily lie for me by explicitly reporting that the attacking units were merely straightening our lines for a winter position. Gay recorded in his personal diary that the immediate purpose of this statement was to completely mislead the German intelligence network. However, declassified archival records indicate it served an equally vital secondary purpose. It provided an official, publicly broadcast administrative narrative of defensive consolidation that effectively neutralized any immediate intervention or cancellation orders from Bradley or Eisenhower, who were lulled into believing Patton was simply dug in for the winter. General Gay's role was far from limited to administrative manipulation behind a desk. He actively intervened at the physical front lines to personally maintain the momentum of these unauthorized operations when they faced imminent collapse. In mid-November, when the 90th Infantry Division's critical bridging operations over the violently flooded Moselle River, stretching precariously from Malling to Königsmacher, were in danger of being completely destroyed by intense German artillery and direct small arms fire, Gay personally conducted a hazardous forward inspection under fire. His calm physical presence, authoritative leadership, and direct engineering guidance under intense enemy shelling stabilized the chaotic bridging operations and ensured the continued bold advance of the division across the river barrier. For this conspicuous gallantry, Gay was subsequently awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, proving that the chief architect of Third Army's bureaucracy was equally formidable in the mud of close combat. While Gay masterfully managed the operational narrative to shield the Army from above, the physical survival and combat capability of the Third Army's offensive depended entirely on bypassing the strict logistical embargoes. This critical, highly dangerous task was orchestrated by the G4 logistics chief, Brigadier General Walter J. Muller, who operated in absolute seamless lockstep with Gay and Patton. Muller, a career officer possessing immense technical expertise and an aggressive disregard for regulatory red tape, was described by his contemporaries as a legendary scavenger whose logistics staff functioned as licensed pirates. Muller understood perfectly that in modern mechanized warfare, official paper authorizations were secondary to physical possession, and he established a clandestine supply acquisition network that operated entirely outside the oversight of the theater's Central Logistics Command. Muller's staff systematically engaged in blatant administrative sabotage to secure the fuel and ammunition required to keep Patton's unauthorized war alive. Theater-wide regulations mandated that all captured German fuel depots be reported immediately to Lieutenant General John C. H. Lee's communication zone, known as COM-Z, for theater-wide redistribution. Muller routinely and deliberately bypassed this requirement. When Third Army units overran massive German rail yards and POL dumps, the G4 staff intentionally concealed these assets from official reports, immediately distributing millions of gallons of liberated German gasoline directly to forward armored units. This unregistered fuel allowed Patton's tanks to launch massive attacks that Chef's official supply charts indicated were logistically impossible, pushing the unauthorized offensive directly into the formidable defenses of Metz. Additionally, Muller's G4 representatives routinely intercepted COM-Z truck convoys and pipelines running directly through the Third Army sector. Utilizing unauthorized or forged requisitions, they forcefully diverted fuel and heavy artillery ammunition destined for the First Army or British sectors. When confronted by theater inspectors, the Third Army staff cited immediate tactical necessity or claimed administrative errors in transit paperwork. This systematic diversion of resources kept Patton's forces armed and mobile, but it introduced severe friction into the broader Allied campaign. It directly starved adjacent units of the ammunition required to suppress German defenses in their own sectors, demonstrating how the Third Army's insubordination began to actively compromise Eisenhower's unified operational plan. The tactical defiance and administrative manipulations of the Third Army staff successfully kept Patton's forces in a state of continuous offensive friction, but the strategic and physical consequences for the Allied effort were severe. By committing Major General Walton Walker's 20 Corps to the direct, headlong reduction of the heavily fortified Metz area, Patton entered a prolonged, 3-month battle of bitter attrition. This violated his own core operational doctrines of speed, mobility, and bypassing enemy strongpoints. The frontal assaults on the ancient and modernized Metz fortresses, culminating in the disastrous attempt to storm Fort Dryant during Operation Thunderbolt, cost the U.S. forces thousands of avoidable casualties and severely battered veteran infantry divisions. Post-war analysis by both Allied and German commanders strongly criticized Patton's stubborn decision to launch a headlong attack directly into the fortified wet gap defenses of the Moselle. Generaloberst Johannes Blaskowitz, commander of the German Army Group G, later observed that a direct attack on Metz was entirely unnecessary. Blaskowitz asserted that a swift swerve northward in the direction of Luxembourg and Bitburg would have met with far greater success. This maneuver would have caused the right flank of the German First Army to collapse completely, leading to the rapid breakdown of the entire Moselle line at a fraction of the cost in Allied lives. Instead, the Third Army found itself trapped in an underground war of tunnels and reinforced concrete bunkers, where armored mobility was rendered completely useless. Furthermore, the logistical hoarding and unauthorized offensive consumption by the Third Army depleted theater-wide stockpiles of critical ammunition and winter supplies, leading to severe physical deprivation for the frontline soldiers. General Omar Bradley's memoirs reveal that the Allied command took a calculated risk by prioritizing the shipment of high-velocity ammunition and gasoline over winter clothing during this exact period. This logistical trade-off, compounded by the historically rainy and freezing autumn weather of the Lorraine, directly contributed to a severe trench foot and frostbite epidemic. The disease devastated the combat strength of the U.S. infantry regiments in November, incapacitating thousands of veteran riflemen before they ever reached the German border. Politically, the systemic circumvention of SHAEF directives by the Third Army staff caused deep, lasting institutional damage. General Eisenhower and his stern chief of staff, Lieutenant General Walter Bedell Smith, grew increasingly distrustful of Patton's operational reports and his staff's administrative justifications. This erosion of institutional trust led to heightened scrutiny of the Third Army's command structure, which directly contributed to Patton's post-war marginalization. Following the cessation of hostilities, when Patton publicly resisted stringent denazification policies and expressed highly controversial views regarding the Soviet Union, Eisenhower felt no institutional loyalty to shield him, leading to his swift removal from the command of his beloved Third Army in October 1945. To truly understand the operational gravity of the Metz paradox, one must examine the specific primary documents that expose this administrative deception. Within the file named the Metz Paradox Investigation, archival records highlight the dramatic shift in command intent preserved in the 20 Corps Field Order No. 12, formally issued on November 3, 1944. This critical document exposes the exact mechanism used to deceive SHAEF. While earlier directives from Eisenhower envisioned the encirclement and systematic reduction of the Metz forts, the final order explicitly redefined the primary mission of all troops as the destruction or capture of the Metz garrison without the investiture or siege of the Metz forts. This precise linguistic adjustment allowed General Walker's Corps to proceed with a full-scale assault while technically adhering to SHAEF's strict mandates against a protracted siege. This deliberate manipulation is further verified by the personal diary and private papers of Major General Hobart Gay, preserved at the U.S. Army Heritage and Education Center in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. Gay's meticulously kept daily journal entries, particularly those written between October 7th and November 20th, 1944, confirm the calculated nature of the winter position press deception. Gay explicitly documented the staff's internal coordination to execute aggressive offensive operations under the guise of local defensive line adjustments. These private confessions demonstrate that the entire Third Army apparatus was operating as a highly synchronized rogue command structure, prioritizing localized tactical victory over the grand strategic framework of the Western Alliance. While Gay managed the narrative, the physical survival of the Third Army's offensive depended on the G4 operational and statistical reports. These logistical archives detail the exact mechanism of Brigadier General Walter J. Muller's illicit supply acquisitions. The daily ledgers reveal an undocumented inventory of captured German fuel stocks that were directly consumed by the 12th and 20th Corps without ever being reported to COMSI headquarters. Muller's brilliant ledger padding kept the Third Army's mechanized units fully capable of launching massive assaults at a time when Eisenhower's official supply charts showed them completely starved of operational mobility. The strategic consequences of this unauthorized campaign extended far beyond the immediate battlefield of Metz. By delaying the Allied advance to the Saar region and the West Wall by over 3 months, the Third Army's fixation on Metz allowed the German Army Group G to rebuild its shattered defenses. If a different operational path had been chosen, specifically the northern swerve toward Luxembourg, advocated by German Generaloberst Johannes Blaskowitz, the entire Moselle line might have collapsed rapidly in September, opening a direct pathway into the German heartland before winter set in. This alternate reality highlights the profound cost of Patton's pride and his staff's administrative rebellion. Ultimately, the Metz campaign concluded with a bittersweet tactical success that masked a broader strategic failure. The heavily defended city finally fell to the American forces on November 22, 1944. Marking the first successful capture of the historic fortress town by an invading army since the year AD 415. Yet the price paid in blood and institutional trust was staggering. The final outlying fortresses held out defiantly until December 13th, completely pinning down vital American units just days before the German army launched its massive, unexpected counteroffensive in the Ardennes, the Battle of the Bulge. The administrative duel between the Third Army staff and the Supreme Allied Command exposes the fragile nature of military coalition and command hierarchy under intense pressure. General Hobart Gay, General Walter J. Muller, and General George S. Patton successfully executed one of the most sophisticated bureaucratic deceptions in modern military history. They proved that an army can be fueled by defiance just as easily as it is fueled by gasoline. However, the lasting legacy of the Metz paradox remains an enduring warning. In the crucible of total war, defeating the strategic plans of your own high command can carry a price tag just as devastating as a defeat inflicted by the enemy. Do you believe General Patton and his staff were justified in using administrative deception to maintain their offensive momentum, or did their insubordination actively harm Eisenhower's broader grand strategy to defeat Germany? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell.